Good morning, Lighthouse. Hey, for those of you that are online, welcome with us today. We have a little bit of a fuller house just because we've got Scotty out in the foyer making breakfast sandwiches. I wish you could smell what we get to smell, those of us that are here. But hey, you got your kitchen right there, so you can throw some bacon on the stove and let it sizzle until it fills the air. Some eggs and cheese, and I think we got guacamole, and we got the whole thing going on out there. But it's a delight to be gathered together in worship today. And I know I get asked from time to time. I get asked, why do we do things in Lighthouse in reverse order? And I know what that typically means when people say, why do you do things in reverse order? Most churches begin with like songs. They have a few songs that they sing, and then they may receive an offering, and then they may have a couple of announcements, a time of greeting, and then the pastor gets up and the pastor preaches, and then they have a closing prayer, and they go their separate ways. And here we kind of do things reverse. It's like we gather in, and before you have a time to catch your breath, I'm already into the teaching. And then after the teaching, we kind of go into worship. And so I have had people ask me, why do you do it that way? And it's not a sacred cow. We can change it and go back to how we used to do it before. But about 10 years ago, I was reading the Bible, just in the book of Genesis, and I noticed that everything that happens is in response to God speaking. So God says this, and then life happens. And God says this, and this happens. And so creation is a response to God's word, God's voice. In addition to that, I notice that every time when we look at Jesus, all the worship that happens is always in response to his word, his activity, something that he either has done or said, and so worship then is a response. So I just got to thinking, that just makes a little bit of sense. We'll start with teaching, and then everything will be in response to that. We'll worship, we'll sing, we'll do art, we'll whatever, all as a way of worshiping God in response to what he has spoken, the good things that he has spoken over our life. So that's kind of where that comes from. But again, we don't have to stick with that, but that's kind of how we have done it, and we can change it up if you guys need me to change it up. Some we can do that as well too. Anyway, wanted to explain that, and then before we get going, while y'all are still getting your breakfast sandwiches and getting ready, I wanted to throw a question out there for you guys to discuss at your tables. You ready for this? Oh, this is going to be a good one. Okay, so here's the question. When you think of like an adage, a motto, like some kind of saying that you've lived your life kind of in pursuit of, or maybe it's just a favorite quote that you remind yourself of, it inspires you, it motivates you, what is that? What's that quote, that motto, that, and it could be a life verse or scripture, but it's one thing that you just will say to yourself to kind of like, and it rings true for you, all right? So at your table, share with each other what your one little adage or quote is that you like a lot. Go for it. I hope you all were able to get your little favorite quotes out there. Am I jumping in too soon? Does everybody got through? Has your tape? Oh, you're still going. All right. They're still going over here. All right. Well, one more minute. One more minute. All right. So if you'd like, today we're going to be walking through the book of Luke, chapter 9. So if you want to get your Bibles turned to Luke 9, we'll walk through that several, and I'll explain why I'm choosing that particular chapter today to walk through. But before we do, Sunday is a day for us to gather together, to have fellowship with one another, to worship. And as we always say, worship is that posture of going, like you're going like this all week long in this kind of horizontal movement, and all of a sudden you have one day where you kind of like lift your head up and you're like, thank you, right? Thank you for today. Thank you for... And so we're going to begin our time of worship by lifting our heads, symbolically lifting our heads vertically, and acknowledging God as creator and being over all of us and with us here today. Abba, we are so grateful for this day that you have made in a week, a day of rest, a day of worship, a day of reflection, a day when we can stop and reflect on the past week, as well as from this summit of this Sunday, we can look forward to the week that is to come. And we can do it in gratitude, and we can do it from a place of being empowered by you. We're not striving, rushing into something, feeling the urgencies of life that are kind of tearing at us. Today we get to push that aside and just be present, be here, be with you. And so we give this moment, these times, in intentional focus to you, both in hearing from your word and what you're speaking to us, as well as in responding with our own prayer, our own reflection, our own songs, as we sing and honor you. And we do all of this today in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. So, again, Luke 9 is what we'll be walking through today. A favorite movie of mine is Braveheart. And I think just as a kid, when you're a young boy, you know, which I was at the time when it came out, and I saw it and I was like, you know, it kind of hit all the things, you know. I was just like, I want to be tough, I want to be strong, I want to be adventurous. And William Wallace kind of was that for me. And there's a lot of quotes in Braveheart, but I think my favorite quote is the speech, I guess, that he gives on the eve of his execution. So he's getting ready to be executed, and the princess comes in, right? And she's kind of pleading with him, you know, you could live a lot longer, just recant. Don't go through with this. You know, you got so many years of life ahead of you, so much that you could do. There's no reason to go through this. You don't need to die. And William Wallace says, all men die, but few really live. All men die, but few really live. I've often, you know, thought about that. Those words, I suppose, that come from a dungeon make a lot of sense. But how do you go about living? Like, everybody dies, but that kind of living that he's talking about, how do you go about it? Well, every year in the month of October, October the 14th, I have it on my calendar, I watch a movie, the same movie, every year. It is, again, connected to younger days of my life. I have forced my kids to watch this repeatedly. My son, in his rite of passage into manhood, had to watch this. My daughters had to watch it, and it's Dead Poet Society. And it answers this very question of William Wallace, all men die, but few men really live. It answers this question for me, this one quote. And the book, although it was written after the movie, is good. It's not, I don't like it as much as the movie version. Perhaps it's just because I like Robin Williams in the movie. But anyway, the boys it's about this all-boys boarding school that is mostly full of drab classes and the kind of boring teachers. And the boys meet this new English teacher that comes to their class, and his name is Mr. Keating. He's charming, he's adventurous, he loves learning, and he loves poetry. And on the first day of class, he invites one of the boys, Mr. Pitts is the boy's name, to read a stanza of the poetry. So the young Mr. Pitts dryly reads this poem. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, old time is still a-flying, and this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, Keating repeated. The Latin term for that sentiment is carpe diem. Does anyone know what that means? Carpe diem? Meeks said, seize the day. Very good, Mr. Meeks. Seize the day, Keating repeated. Why does the poet write these lines? Because he's in a hurry, one student calls out, and as all the others snicker. No, it's not because we're food for worms, lads, Keating shouted, because we're only going to experience a limited number of springs, summers, and falls. One day, hard as it is to believe, each and every one of us is going to stop breathing, turn cold, and die. He paused dramatically. Stand up, he urged the students, and peruse the faces of the boys who attended this school 60 or 70 years ago. Don't be timid. Go look at them. The boys got up, walked to the class pictures lining the honor room walls. They looked at faces of young men staring out at them from the past. They're not that different than any of you, are they? Hope in their eyes, just like yours. They believe themselves destined for wonderful things, just like many of you. Well, where are those smiles now, boys? What of the hope? The boys stared at the photos, their faces sober and reflective. Keating walked swiftly around the room, pointing from photo to photo. Did most of them not wait until it was too late before making their lives even into one iota of what they were capable? In chasing the almighty deity of success, did they not squander their boyhood dreams? Most of those gentlemen are fertilizing daffodils now. However, if you get really close, boys, you can hear them whisper, "Go ahead." He urged, "Lean in. Go on, hear it, can you?" The boys were quiet. Some of them leaned hesitantly toward the photographs. Carpe diem. Carpe diem, Keating whispered loudly. Seize the day, make your lives extraordinary. Make your lives extraordinary. I get stuck right here at these particular words. Did most of them not wait until it was too late before making their lives into even one iota of what they were capable? And here's the point of both of these kind of movies that I'm reflecting on. You cannot seize a life like William Wallace is talking about. Like a life, everyone dies, but few really live. You cannot seize a life without seizing a day. You seize the life by seizing each day. A life is made up of a bunch of days, and each day is important. And it's why if I go back to William Wallace, and this quote really resonates deeply, I think, with all of us here, when we hear somebody say something like, all people die, but few people really live. And we're going to go through a few more quotes today, especially from Jesus. But when you hear someone say that, I think it resonates with all of us for one reason. Like there's one reason why something like that resonates deeply. It's because we all know it's a part of our creative DNA. It's created and placed inside of us that we were meant to mean something. And most of us in this room, most of people that exist in the world would gladly trade a shorter life that's meaningful. They'd trade anything. Like they would trade away a long, boring old life that's meaningless for a shorter, meaningful one. Like if somebody said to you, I'll give you 80 years, but it's going to be boring, there's going to be no meaning to it, it's just like the same thing over and over, it's Groundhog Day, over and over and over. Or you can have half of that, but it's going to be full of meaning. I know me. I take the meaning. I take the life that is full of meaning. And so that's why that resonates with us. Now, today, in this week's devotional guide, we're going to have an opportunity to be guided into that. But before we get into that, I want to talk about 4 ways of living. There are basically four different ways that a person can live. I think this is on Monday. Could I get one of those handouts? Oh, awesome. My better half grabbing me the handout. The first way I think that a lot of us can get stuck in living is thinking that life is. Here we go. Live as though you will never die. Does anybody remember that? Like when you're a kid? Like this is like when you're a kid. It's just like during summertime. It's like you just have no sense of time, right? Before your innocence is stripped away from you, it's like you're going to live forever. It's like the Garden of Eden, right? You just think that this is going to go on and on and on. Life is great. We dance, we skip, we play with the dog, we go on our little adventure, jaunts out by the creek bed. We dig up pollywogs, we play with frogs. Life is so grand. We sit out underneath a cherry tree, we pick off the cherries, or when I was a kid, they had a cherry orchard right next to our house, and we'd run over there, and I would eat them till I got sick at my stomach, right? Just had so many cherries, I'd be like, oh. But you have this kind of like, whatever it is, bucolic life. Everything is great. Live as though, that's one way of living. Live as though you'll never die. And that typically doesn't last forever. The second way of living is live as though you aren't alive. And this is not to be confused with you're already dead, but this really is living from that moment that you lose your innocence all the way until something wakes you up. In recovery, we call this, you kind of hit rock bottom. It's like from one point to this point. And then everything after that wake up is a whole different kind of living. But that piece of living where it's hypnotic or you're stuck in a loop and it's just the same thing over and over and over. It's clocking in, clocking out, living for the weekend. It can be that. It can be the cycles of addiction that you go through. But typically in this stage, we burn bridges. We make reckless decisions. We abuse our bodies. It's just kind of... Life doesn't seem to have a point, right? And this is the second way of living. Then there are 2 other ways of living. And by the way, both of these next 2 ways of living that I'm going to reflect on here are positive. They're very positive, and you can actually do both of them simultaneous. Typically, the first one happens first, and then at some point you can enter into the second one. For those that are just especially gifted, they can get to this second way of living. These 2 ways of living is, one, live as though you are dying. And this usually happens from the moment that you wake up, you hit rock bottom, you're like, all right, I got to do something, I got to make a difference, it's from that moment all the way until you're buried. So, and this live like you're dying it's a sense that my life is finite. I have one shot here. And so I want to give it the best that I got. I want to pour myself into this. When a person that's living as though they're dying, they're living as though everything from that point forward is a last chance to get right, to experience. And in that space, whatever it is, things become very simple and very clear. Like before, it was just a fog, living in this loop. Now, all of a sudden, I've got a limited number of days. And so I'm going to die. And so I'm going to live kind of with that. When people have this way of living, they typically put relationships first. They're not afraid to take risks, to step out and adventure in the things that they feel perhaps called to do. They're just not afraid. There's no sense of self-preservation. Like that. This whole idea of I got to preserve myself, no, I'm dying anyway. So I'm gonna live on purpose. I'm gonna live as though my life counts. They are aware of the past and they are aware of the future, but they're fully active in that present moment. So it's not like they're not aware of the past. They're aware of it. They're also aware of the future. There's this beautiful picture of Jesus in John chapter 13, where it says, and Jesus, realizing where he had come from and where he was going to, knelt down and washed his disciples' feet. He's aware of the past, where he comes from. He's aware of the future, where he's going. And he's fully present in that moment of washing feet, of serving. Like he knows this is the Last Supper. This is tomorrow he's going to die. And he's fully present in that moment. So there's that. And there's living with the sense of people that live as though they're dying. They live with the sense of what matters. They live from that place of what matters to the truest part of themselves. They're not trying to get people's approval. They're done with that. Because that's an impossible game. They're not living to amass material wealth, but there's this true part of them, and they live from that when you live as though you're dying. The second one that's also a great place to live from is to live as though you're already dead. To live as though you're already dead, it means that everything from this point forward is a gift that you get to give away. It's as if you talk with people that were told that they were going to die, and they've lived beyond that point. And it's like every day is a gift. It's like I was supposed to be dead a year. I should have died in that car accident. I should not be here right now. It's a gift. It's a beautiful gift. So they live from that perspective. They also, people that live as though they're already dead, they don't have any shame. They don't have an ego. They don't have all the fear. They don't live in fear. This is the early church, by the way. The early church gets this right. When there was the huge plague that went through the Roman Empire, the Christians were the ones that were out in the streets helping those that had the plague. When everybody else was throwing their family members and their friends out into the streets, the Christians were taking them in. But by the way, this is why they say Christianity exploded overnight, it was the Christians taking in these that were unwanted. Why did they do that? They had no fear of death. They had already died, and their life was hid with Christ in God. There's no fear. So people that have already died, they have no fear. They're living from that place of gift. They live with open hands. They're not clutching, grasping, trying to get. They hold everything with an open hand. They give. They share. There's no. They live for what matters, for the truest part of others. Both are good to live for the truest part of who you are, but it's also beautiful to live for the truest part of others. Like you giving your life away. And when I think of this, I'm drawn to Martin Luther King Jr., the last sermon that he preached in Memphis. This was on the evening before his death, and before he was assassinated. And he says, in that sermon, this is at the very end of the sermon, he says, I got into Memphis, and some began to say the threats or talks about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop, and I don't mind. Like anybody, I'd like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm so happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. The next evening, as he was getting ready to go to the next place he was going to be speaking, as they headed out to the event, Dr. King was assassinated. His last words to the musician Ben Branch were this: Ben, make sure you play Take My Hand, Precious Lord at the meeting tonight. Play it real pretty. And then he was shot. Martin Luther King Jr. said, a man who does not have something for which he is willing to die is not fit to live. There's this idea that where we get meaning from life is when we find that thing we're willing to die for. And we all know the greatest example of this, the mimetic exemplar of living as though you're dying, is Jesus Christ. Like no one gets it like Jesus. Like on every single level gets it. And so I want to take you to Luke chapter 9. And the reason why I'm going to Luke chapter 9 is because this, in Luke's gospel anyway, is the pivot. Jesus' ministry has been building up, larger and larger and larger crowds, more and more people. He feeds multitudes. Like we have the whole feeding of the 5,000, which, by the way, the feeding of the 5,000 is like the apex. It's the zenith of Jesus' ministry. Like you don't even have a building that can hold this number of people. You are out in the wilderness, and you've got probably 15, maybe 20,000 people out in a wilderness, because it's just men that they were counting at the time. Out in the wilderness, and he speaks beautiful words and then feeds, all these people. That's like the peak. And right after that, he pivots, and everything starts going in a different direction. And so we're going to track this because it all happens in chapter 9. We're going to track this. Chapter 9, beginning at verse 10, you have Jesus feeding the 5,000. And then that whole story of feeding the 5,000 goes from verse 10 all the way down to verse 17. Okay? Remember, we're at the top of Jesus' ministry. Verse 18. Once when Jesus was praying in private and his disciples were with him, he asked them, who do the crowds say I am? And they replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life. But what about you? He asked. Who do you say I am? Peter answered, God's Messiah. Jesus strictly warned them not to tell this to anyone. I'm going to just stop right here because I felt to say this today. I think it fits our context of where we're at as a church. This is referred to the messianic secret, and Jesus will do this over and over and over. He'll say things like, don't tell anyone. Like when the demons start talking, we know who you are. He's like, silence, don't say anything. He also says this over and over to people when he performs a miracle. He'll say, be sure and tell no one about this. And this is referred to the messianic, experts call the messianic secret. And the idea is this, that early on in our journey, in our walk with God, we have an incredible experience of revelation with God, experience of God's power in our life, experience of some kind of healing that transforms the way that we think. But there is some kind of encounter with God, be it a revelation, be it a healing in the heart, be it a physical encounter. We have this encounter with God. And we tend to immediately create this kind of religious thing out of it that we're going to imprint on everybody around us. And that's because we have a wrong way of thinking about what an experience with God is. We typically think that we get experiences with God so that we can go show other people that they're wrong and that we're right and that, look, it's our ego, and that, look what happened to me. And Jesus wants us to understand that when we have an experience in God and our life begins to transform, there is a season when we need to just shut up and be quiet and let that word work in us. This happens to Jeremiah, by the way. The word's given to him, and he is told to keep quiet and don't say a word. And he said, that word in me turned into a fire, and it began to burn. And this is what God's word will do inside of us. It begins to, if we sit there with it and we're just quiet with it and we're reflective with it and we don't act like we know it all with everyone else, it begins to transform us because that's its purpose. And not merely be something we beat other people up with. Right? So, Jesus says this, don't tell this to anyone. Now watch, verse 22. Here's the pivot. And then he said, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed on the third day and be raised to life. There it is. He is sharing with his closest followers, I am going to die. And everything from this point forward is about me dying. I have a short amount of time. Everything I do from this point forward is very strategic. It's intentional. I'm not wasting any time. Now watch his next words. This whole chapter, he moves from here, and the rest of the chapter is him talking about death and how it's going to shape them and their life. So the next words he says to them is, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. There it is, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, dearly beloved. There it is. Daily. Carpe diem. Seize the day. This isn't something that I'm just going to change my life. No, you're going to change your day. One day. That day that you have possession of, that's it. And you're going to do it like you are dying. Now, let's just be really practical with this. We can have a lot of theological discussions about what it means to take up your cross. But in a very, very just kind of real way of how they would have understood that. The cross was an executionary piece of equipment. Basically, he's saying, live like you are dying. You've got your cross and you're carrying it, which means you're marching to your death. You carry your own cross. The cross that you die on, you carry. This is what I'm doing from this point forward. And you, if you're going to be my followers, you're going to live with this mentality. You're going to live with the mentality that you are dying. You're going to live as though you're dying. And then he gives a little explanation here when he says, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. Like, here's that whole self-preservation. We all want to, save our life. We all want to, hoard it, or we want to somehow preserve it, or we want to somehow, keep it and do everything that we can to not let it go. And he says the person that does that, the person that's trying to save their life, that's trying to live forever, they're going to lose it. And the person that gives it away, the person that's willing to lose it, the person that's willing to live with open hands, the person that is willing to just live as if they're dying, they're going to be the ones that actually gain a life. And this is so mind-boggling to us because it's the reverse of everything that our intuition tells us. It's counterintuitive. Like, we don't want to live this way. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He goes through this moment. He walks from this scene, 8 days later, Mount Transfiguration, which would be verse 28, again, of chapter 9. You guys are going to be really familiar with chapter 9 by the end of today. He moves to verse 28, goes up on the mountaintop to pray. He's on the mountaintop. Have you all ever wondered, what did Jesus talk about on the mountaintop with Moses and Elijah? Has anybody wondered that? Well, Luke is the only one that tells us what they talk about. Nobody else talks about it. But it's because it's in the middle of chapter 9. So he gets there on this mountaintop, and he has this transfiguration with Moses and Elijah. And in verse 31, we're told they spoke about his departure, literally his exodus, which he would accomplish in Jerusalem. He's talking about his death. He is with Moses and Elijah, and he's like, okay, here's what's going to happen. You know, I know it. I'm revealing it to everybody, but I am going to Jerusalem, and that's my exodus. Think of the children of Israel and their exodus from Egypt. The exodus. It's the language. My exodus from the Egypt that I am in is going to happen in Jerusalem. He talks about that with them. And what he has to accomplish. He's got a mission in this death that he's going to die. Peter and James and John, they do the things that we talk about. You know, they're like, let's build 3 tabernacles. Like let's make a religion out of this. Let's organize this, make a religion out of it, and you know we'll get people to come. We'll do tours. We'll do tours up here, and we'll make a lot of money. And all of a sudden, while they're like coming up with their religious plans, a cloud comes down from heaven and covers Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. And then a voice speaks and says, "This is my son. Hear him." In other words, shut up. Be quiet. Your ideas are not what I'm after right now. Just listen to him. He has the words of life. Listen. Right? And guess what they do? If you look at verse 36, the disciples kept this to themselves and did not tell anyone at that time. They're getting it now. They're like, okay, we're not going to say anything. And they don't tell anybody anything. They allow that to work them over. Right, so then Jesus, in verse 41, there's this demon-possessed kid, and his disciples are trying to cast the devil out of him. Like, this is all happening one event right after the other. They can't. And Jesus is just like, you unbelieving and perverse generation, how long will I be with you? Again, there is that sense of urgency. Like, you've got to get this. Verse 43, while everyone was marveling at the miracle that he does with the demon-possessed kid, he says to his disciples, listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The Son of Man is going to be delivered over to human hands. And there it is again. It's like at the forefront of his mind. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. He talks about it with Moses and Elijah on Mount Transfiguration. He talks about it with his disciples. When he's trying to cast it out, he's like, how long am I going to be here? You guys are not getting this. And then he walks away from that miracle and he looks at his disciples and he says, I'm about to be delivered. Like, you're not getting it. My time is short. I am living on mission right now. Everything is strategic. It's important. So, then they start arguing. You know, they start arguing over who's going to be greatest in the kingdom. And he's having to zero in on this. You know, that's not important. A child, like this child is more important. You guys you're missing the whole point. And then they get in another discussion over, there's some people that are casting out demons, or they're doing works in Jesus' name, and they're like, we should rebuke them because they're not with us. And Jesus is like, oh God, how long? You guys, they're not fighting us. They're with us. If they're not fighting you, they're with you. Leave them alone. You know, so then they want to call fire down from heaven on a group. Jesus says. Anyway, so we get to this moment, and this is the point that I kind of want to draw your attention to here. In verse 51, it says, as the time was approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. So Jerusalem for him marks death. And he is in the complete northernmost part of Israel, and he's going to have to travel all the way down to kind of not the southernmost, but it's in the southern part of Israel. And it's like, as long as I'm up here, I'm safe. Jerusalem represents death and dying. And now he knows his time is coming, and he's like, it's time to go. And he starts marching towards Jerusalem. And from this point forward, everything that Jesus says, everything that he does, everything that he's engaged in is as if I am dying. And I want you to live your life like I'm living mine. Take up your cross and follow me. Live as though you're dying. Now, once he dies and the disciples encounter his death and they experience the life-giving force of his death in their life, they have this moment 50 days later where they experience the Spirit, the living Spirit of Jesus inside of them. We call it Pentecost. They receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And this happens to the Apostle Paul. This happens, and for those that have that encounter with the Spirit, they begin to live as though they are already dead, that they have died with Christ. And that every day from that moment forward, which they would, the First Century Church would put that in the category of from their baptism. Like their baptism represents the death with Christ. That we are buried with Christ in baptism and we rise to walk a brand new life. Those movements, right? So, for those of you, and I'm sure most of you here have been baptized, and some of you may have not been baptized, and you may be looking forward to it. I know I've talked with a couple of you that are talking about it, and it's exciting. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing to really look forward to. For those of you that have been baptized, it's an important thing to reflect on that. Like, that's a significant event in your life. It marks your death. And we have to daily take up the cross and follow Christ. And part of that taking up the cross is reflecting on my life is buried with Christ in God. I am not my own. I have been bought with a price. Therefore, I glorify God in my body and in my spirit, which are his. Or as the Apostle Paul will say in Galatians, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. That is a man that is living as though he is already dead. What's animating me right now is not my own passions and my own desires and my own 5-year goals and my IRA and my 401k and my whatever. That's not what's animating my life. I do those things because they're necessary. But what animates my life is this presence inside of me. That I give all the glory, the honor, the praise. That is what is, I'm dead to all the other stuff. I'm just absolutely dead to it. So you can live as though you're about ready to die, or you can live as though you're already dead. And they're both beautiful. I remember 2010, I'll wrap it up with this. I think it was 2010. It might have been earlier than that. It might have been 9. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. Anytime you get over 10 years, it's a long time ago. I somehow connected with this guy's story that he'd gone into the doctor and he had been told that he had 6 months to live. The doctor said to him, you have 6 months left. He was in his 50s. You got 6 months to live, and go put your house in order. You've got an aggressive cancer. Put your house in order. And he walked out of the doctor's office and sat in his car and pulled out a piece of paper and he wrote down. He's like, you know what? Okay, I've got 6 months. That actually is kind of a gift because I've just been kind of going through the motions. There are things I really want to do, and I'm actually going to do them now. And his list included everything from he wanted to ask a few people for forgiveness. He wanted to spend time with his grandkids. He had this list of stuff that he wanted to do. And he had always wanted to start this business. He's like, I only got 6 months, though. But I'm going to quit my job, and I'm going to start this. I want to do this. So I'll do it kind of on the side while I'm doing this other stuff. But I'm really going to live these 6 months, right? So he does this, tells his family, goes through all of this, really is committed to it. And, 6 months come and go. He's still kind of ticking along and feeling about the same. And so calls his doctor up. The doctor says, hey, why don't you come in? We'll do another checkup. So he goes into the doctor's office, and the doctor says to him, man, looks like it's not as aggressive right now as it was, and it's slowed down a little bit. But I'm gonna give you 6 more months. And so, he's like, goes back out to the car, sits down, pulls out another sheet of paper. He's like, all right, I've got 6 more months. What am I going to do? So he makes his list. But this time, he starts off at the top and he says, all right, I should not have got this day. Like, I was not supposed to get this day. I'm supposed to be dead. And I got it. And he's like, and he starts feeling like so grateful. He gets kind of emotional and choked up, and he's like, I've got today. What a blessing. Well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to live as though each day after that 6-month mark is a gift. And if I wake up tomorrow and I'm still breathing, I'm going to go, oh my God, I got 2 of them. I got 3 of them. I'm going to keep doing that until I croak. So then he's like, well, then what do I want to do? He's like, well, since this is a gift, I want to give this away. Who can I give? So he's like, okay, that business that I've been starting up, I'm just going to give away the profits. I'm going to give that away to these shelters, It goes all this list, right? Another 6 months, come and go. He goes in the doctor. The doctor's like, I don't know what to tell you, but you're alive, and it looks like it's stopped for the time being. So this guy lives another 20 years, 6 months at a time. And he accomplishes so much meaningful stuff with his life. Like, when he's telling the story, he's talking about like the business that he had built. All the funds from it are going to support a couple of projects. And he's like, it's like, I don't know if I have tomorrow. Like, I'm not sure that I do. So I'm going to spend time with my friends. We're going fishing. Just like things that are just like things you do, right? When you're really being intentional with your life. This story so inspired me, by the way. I cannot remember who he was for the life of me. I got on Google on Saturday. I'm like trying to remember who it was. I cannot find for the life of me. I even called a couple people because I preached a sermon about it. I'm like, do you remember? They're like, no, I can't remember what you preached last week, let alone 10 years ago. So anyway, I was so inspired by this that I was like, okay, I am going to live as though I have 1 week of life. And then I'll preach about it. I'll preach about, live as though you're dying. And so I did. I took 1 week, and I mapped out the whole week all the way through to like on Friday, I will have my own funeral, and I will go to the cemetery, and I will sit at a tombstone, and I will contemplate death and dying, and I will just it'll be an important week of my life. And then on Saturday, I'll reflect on what I would do differently if I had another week, So it was a way of thinking through it. So did that, process all the way through it. There were some big takeaways for me. The first big takeaway for me was 1 week is not enough time to get your house in order. It's not. I tried to get a hold of several friends that I'm deeply close to, and they were just too busy, and we just never got together. And it's like I died before I could ever say goodbye, and I loved them. There were people that I was able to get in touch with, and it was really funny. Like, I called my dad, and I was like, Dad, I'm living as though I'm dying this week, and so I just want to tell you I love you. And he's like, what? Hold on. What is going on? I was like, yeah. So I explained, he's like, oh, okay, so I want to make sure I say these things. Said it to my mom, got a hold of her. My kids, they were so little. So this was a long time ago because they were like little. I took them up to Mount Davidson in San Francisco, right here, up to the cross. I sat down with them, and I told them the story of Jesus. I made a big to-do about it, they had no clue what was going on. Jed was throwing rocks out in the street. And anyway, all that to say, whatever we're given, it's not enough. In some respects, like to do the things we want to do, if we're not seizing the one day that we have. If we're not taking this day seriously, it's just not enough. That Sunday, got up, spoke about it, and it was a moving moving time of people reflecting and whatnot. And I played this song. And I'm going to play this song for you. But I have to warn y'all. This is not typically the genre of music that I listen to. But the words are really, really fitting for what we're talking about here today. And if you would like to read along in the words, I've put the words along with the song that Andy's going to be leading us in a moment. I put the words on the back. They're in there, and you can read along. "Live Like You Are Dying" is the name of the song. For those of you that are familiar with Tim McGraw, I'm sure you'll. But I thought this would be a great way to spend some time kind of reflecting here today. I have placed inside of your notes like a 4-questionnaire path that includes everything from how to write up a will. And by the way, let me just say this, because I think this is really important for Christians, and we don't get it. We haven't got it yet. Our Jewish, heritage does get that. But the blessing that we see Abraham give to Isaac, that we see Joseph give to his sons, that we see gets passed from David to Solomon, like this idea of blessing is a will. It's a spiritual will that I am going to pass on to you, like we see with Elijah passing on his will to Elisha with the mantle that falls from heaven in the chariot of fire. When we talk about Old Testament and New Testament, we're talking about wills. The New Testament is the last will and testament of Jesus Christ. It's his will that he is passing on to his disciples. And I think when we think about our lives, a lot of times because we live in a capitalistic society, we think that the only thing we can pass on is money. No, you've got something spiritually rich to pass on to another generation. And you can put that in a will. That I will, something as simple as my Bible, or something like, this passion for Christ I see in so-and-so, and I'm wishing this and blessing you with what God blessed me with in my life. So as you think about some of these things you can work through this week, I think it's something we don't do every day, but it is something we want to do maybe once or twice, or once a year, or once every other year. You reflect on it, and you're like, okay, this is what I want to, so that we're ready to pass those things on. So anyway, I'm going to play this song, and then you guys can sit there, reflect, and then after this, Andy's going to come up and lead us in I'll come up and introduce Andy, and then, okay, awesome. Very well. As Andy gets ready to come up here, I want to say this. I know sometimes we feel like, well, what do I have? What may I have to give with my days? Hear me. Christ Jesus loves you so much and sees the value of your life. Doesn't matter what your past is. Of this day, today. You say, but yeah, yesterday. Today is the day of salvation. And today you can start fresh, new. How does he offer that? Because he's willing to give you his life in exchange for yours. My ratty, old, beat-up life? Yes. In exchange for that, he gives you his life. And when you believe that, like when you actually are like, oh my God, I think I got it. I think I got his life on me. Uh-oh. When that happens, it's over. Game changer. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the past 80 years seem like a waste. And you've been given 5 days after 80 years. Those 5 days will be magical, powerful, beautiful. And you can do more in those 5 days with Christ inside of your life than you can do in 80 wasted years. So, carpe diem, right? Seize this day. Allow Christ to seize your heart by faith through his grace and gift. Andy's going to lead us in worship here. I'm going to ask that while Andy's leading us in worship that, I know there's a tendency for us to clap and whatnot, but sometimes it can throw, I think, the musicians a little bit offbeat because we don't have a drummer. So if you'll sing along for sure, but maybe not clap, I think we can help our musicians as they're